There is some funding for peace research in Germany now. It is going to some relatively huge institutes, and there is a council who distributes the money. And in this council, the government has the majority. So you can imagine what kind of research is financed. And you can imagine as well to what degree peace researchers themselves, when they develop a project, have always in their mind, will they finance it or will they not? So they are castrating themselves in their own research questions. It's very democratic, but it is not that what really we need, an independent research in the benefit of all.
Where is the peace movement? And where are its academics? Many of us have been wondering what happened to the hippies, the activists, the journalists, the musicians, and the masses of people at universities who once stood on podiums, hilltops, and in front of cameras, campaigning locally and internationally to end the wars in Vietnam, Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc. They seem to have all but vanished in the first year of the war in Ukraine. So what happened? I'm joined today by a German heavyweight of critical peace studies to approach that question. Dr. Werner Ruf is Professor for International and Intersocietal Relations and Foreign Policy. He obtained his PhD in 1967 from the University of Freiburg, taught and researched in the US, in France, North Africa, Yugoslavia, later Croatia, and Germany for decades. He's also one of the signatories to a letter to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz back in April 2022 to stop weapon deliveries to Ukraine, an unpopular opinion back then and, may I say, still now. Professor Ruf, thank you for joining me.
I'm happy to be with you.
Professor Ruf, you wrote a very insightful German language article about the origins and somewhat sad developments of critical peace studies in Germany. And maybe we start from the end where you say, and I quote you here in English, the short history of German peace research could and should be a lesson that science must and can make a socially responsible contribution to a more peaceful world. Could you please explain?
Well, I think that critical, which means full of discussion, research is important to make research advance. You cannot go one way and you finance it and whatsoever, and then you come to results, and these results turn over to be recommendations for political action or government decisions. No, we need a plurality and we need independence. We need especially independence that the researchers can define themselves what they find important, what they find a contribution to peace or whatsoever. We have had in Germany a very, very short phase of such an approach to set up peace research. And this is not only for peace research, it's for research in general. Maybe I can say something to this later on. And this was a phase which was very much contested from the conservative groups in Germany, especially the Christian Democratic parties, because I said this is just apology for private goals, for interests of peace researchers. We need a tense and clear public control of that. And so the whole experiment more or less collapsed, and many peace researchers did not give in, were pushing for funding and so on and so on. And finally, we found a beautiful solution. There is some funding for peace research in Germany now. It is going to some relatively huge institutes, and there is a council who distributes the money. And in this council, the government has the majority. So you can imagine what kind of research is financed. And you can imagine as well to what degree peace researchers themselves, when they develop a project, have always in their mind, will they finance it or will they not? So they are castrating themselves in their own research questions. It's very democratic, but it is not that what really we need, an independent research in the benefit of all.
You wrote in your article that the critical peace studies, the way you understand them, were born out of a reactionary movement, basically the academic arm of the peace movement of the 1960s, right? A part of research researchers that wanted to contribute to the cause of peace, and not just research when peace emerges and when war happens and so on, not a dry science, but an active part of making peace. You saw that yourself, right? You were part of this whole development in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. Where does this critical peace studies stand today?
That's a complicated question. Well, first, as you mentioned rightly, this development of peace research, the so-called critical peace research, is as well a result of the 68 movement. It was critical, it was anti-capitalistic, and especially one principle was important, to come back to the fact that, what is peace? Is peace the absence of war, what Johann Galtung once called negative peace, or is peace something more? Is peace something of a society which has less and less conflicts, which means which has less and less reasons for violent solution of conflict, at the end war? And this means a lot of things. You have all of a sudden a goal which goes away from the state borders inside the society. And you look inside the society, what can be the conflicts? And there you come necessarily to the fact that these conflicts may be linked to the social and economic order of a society. Again, I quote Galtung with his concept of structural violence. That is, societies are organized in a way that already in their structure, you have violence as an element of constructing society. So this kind of research was for a long while considered to be leftist, socialist, communist, whatever you have on epitaph, which is not the point. The point is to research or think about the problems we have inside our societies. But I got lost on your question. Sorry, would you repeat your main question?
The question is, where does this critical peace studies stand today? Especially, and I mean it because we've seen weird things recently, especially. Maybe let me put it this way. You write in your article that there was a 2022 peace survey or Friedensgutachten by one of the most important peace institutions in Germany, and that peace survey actually recommended weapon deliveries to Ukraine, right? And I think that was quite a shock to you and to the people who come out of the 68 kind of peace research. Could you explain that?
Well, one of the principles, I think, of the peace movement has always been, it is not anymore now, maybe, that weapons will not bring peace. You may kill people, you may tranquilize people, you might be victorious one state of the other over the other, but you will never have peace, especially if you think at this notion of peace I just tried to develop. So this is a break, and I explained this break by the change in the structure of peace research. Peace research is nowadays in Germany organized as, well, mostly in these institutes. It is financed by public or private money. So you have to behave in a way that you get this money. So this gives the whole peace research a new drive, a new direction, down to the fact that the colleagues or professors who are directing these big institutes, you have to be big, you have to have people, you have to have manpower to do research. They are obliged to find a new project for their collaborators. Otherwise, they will be workless. So this is a whole system which goes to make peace research more and more not organized, not ordered by the real power, but slightly, it is organized in a way that it fits those who give the money. And even when you develop a project, you will always think about the fact, will they finance that? Or should I change a sentence? Should I do this? Or should I do something else? So this is very democratic, but not independent.
So, and it all boils down to the problem that everybody wants peace, but peace on their terms, right? We live in a world where the Secretary General of NATO literally says, weapons are the way to peace. So if we follow that logic, then researching how the weapons help to develop peace, then that would be peace research, right?
Well, that's the peace of the old Roman Empire already. And Mr. Stoltenberg once quoted this beautiful, stupid and wrong sentence. If you want peace, prepare war. Yeah, okay, this was the war the Romans did. It was called pacification. One was killing until there was some kind of a quietness. This is not the solution peace research has, when you think that everybody has its interest and that a peaceful society must be based on the fulfillment of the maximum of interest of all people concerned. Otherwise, you have the quietness of a cemetery. This is not peace.
Yeah, I have no problem at all with preparing for peace, preparing for war, as long as you don't do it. But what we see over and over is that once you have the means, you go and implement.
Yeah, once you have the means, and you have one more thing, which I think is very, very up to date now. You go into a concept of peace, which is linked to the concept of cooperation, of understanding the other, of coming to grips with mutual and conflictual interests in some sense, or you have peace based on strength, on threat, on deterrence, which is fundamentally not based on peace, which is based on the fact we are threatening you so much that you may give in before we should. And that's what we have actually. We have again a return to a concept of peace, which is based on deterrence, and not anymore, as we had it some 30 years ago, a concept of mutually agreed respect, mutually agreed needs of security. If the other, my neighbor, my enemy, whatsoever, says, this is something I will not accept because I consider it as a threat to my security, then you have to refrain and look another way. That was what came out, if you want, from Willy Brandt's Eastern policy. What came out, what was the basis of the disarmament treaties at the late 80s and in the 90s, which respected the interest of the other. To build solid peace, you have to take care of the interest of the other. and not only build up a system where you say, I'm the strongest. He will not dare doing war. You will avoid negative war, but you will not get peace.
But so the argument that then will be immediately thrown at you if you say something like that, especially in mainstream media, will be, but that's naive. You cannot make war, you cannot make peace with Putin. Putin is an absolute aggressor, and Putin wants to create a new Russian empire, a new Soviet Union. So you cannot make peace with him. You cannot make peace with Hitler. So how do you respond as a peace researcher, professional peace researcher, to that argument?
Well, I'm an old man, and I have met in my life nearly a dozen Hitlers. I knew the real one. I'm old enough for that. And then came the others, the Hitler of the Nile, and the Hitler of Baghdad, and the Hitler of Yugoslavia, and the Hitler. No, policy is not because some people are more or less sick in their head. Politics is a result of interests and of pushing through these interests. We can discuss about the way it is done. So we have to look at the interests of people, at the interest of classes, maybe, at the interest of states. These are the real mobiles for political decisions. And what you just quoted, yes, we have now, in democracy, we have the need of justifying political decisions. How do you justify political decisions on a very abstract level? That's difficult. But if you can get down to the people, the poor people, how they are suffering, then you get some kind of sentimentality and of consensus. And you just feed people with certain information, with horrible things. This morning in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, you have a beautiful headline, 50 million of grenades for Ukraine. Oh, good. But in Ukraine, you only see the pictures of people, of women, of children sitting in the subway, protecting themselves from Russian bombs. These 50 million grenades, they just evaporate. They don't kill. You just escalate the killing. You will never get peace this way. And the question is, what price is it worth? Do you really say, okay, I quote Mrs. Allred, the Iraq war, 500,000 children died, and she said, well, yeah, it was worth it. It is obscene, such sentence. Therefore, I stay with this other concept of de-escalating, of respecting the other, and to preserve human lives. And what we have now, just the last remark, we have a kind of mobilization for conflict solution, which is very much linked to a concept of strength, of threat, and of the big, very simple concept. We are the good ones, the other are the bad ones, and we must educate the others, then we will have a good world. Is it so easy? Is it really so easy? Are there only good ones? And the good ones, it's always we, and the bad ones, it's always the others. So we would have to think a little bit of it. And what we have now is that hatred among nations is growing and not disappearing. And this disappearing would be the necessary reason for making peace.
Yeah, and the hatred among nations is at the moment being fueled, right? I mean, because we don't only see sanctions against the state of Russia, we see sanction against the Russian people, sanction against Russian culture. We see all forms of glorification of everything that is Ukraine and everything of demonization of everything is Russia, to the point where people demand that Russian athletes should not be allowed to join the Olympic Games, which has this broad goal of creating an understanding again among the people. So what we are seeing is a political movement in the West, probably also in Russia to some extent, to decouple these links. So how is it possible that in Europe, again, we do this over and over, every 50, 60 years, we strangle each other again and again, and every time we claim, oh, it's different this time because this time the other one is really the devil. Why do we fall into this trap every time? And every time what you need to do is you need to capture the population, right? The population needs to be on board in order to go to war. And every time we manage in Europe to start hating each other to the point where we are fine with killing hundreds of thousands of the other one. Why?
Why? And how does it work? And how would it work the other way around? Mm-hmm. Let me tell you a story. In 1944, I was 7 years old, and my mother brought me to school. The school teacher, my father, was in the war and was away. He was replaced by a 200% Nazi woman from Alsace. And this woman said to my mother, I must congratulate you that you have born a son to the Führer who will make war against France in about 10 years. Now, the interesting thing is, you have this, okay, is no German would make war against the Frenchman today, or no Frenchman against German. It was possible to get rid of this so-called Erbfeindschaft, of this hereditary hatred. So you can organize it that way or the other way. Why can't we organize or work in a way that people stay together? Therefore, I find it especially horrible in the actual crisis that all the fine elements of diplomacy, partnership of towns, cultural cooperation, scientific cooperation, all these things are cut. These are the elements where people see that the other people are people as well, with the same needs, with the same aspirations. And these are the things we should really work on to make up a more peaceful society.
And in the end, lasting peace between Germany and France was brought through the Europeanization of both of these people and both of these systems. And one of the greatest failure after the end of the Cold War was leaving Russia outside the European project. We never integrated, and that is backfiring huge time.
Yeah, this is the key of the problem. And there have been so many attempts of Russia for coming in. Think about the concept of Gorbachev, of the common house. Well, you have to give them a room in that house. And for me, I'm not a realist in the sense of the of the tradition of political science, but the realists are right on the one hand. They are making the approaches for political science interpretations. Now, when you look at this concept, and when the international system is a system which is anarchical and is only oriented toward power and so on, then you had, from the point of view of the only left superpower, you have to kick out the Russians. Mm-hmm. And Russia, with its resources and its raw materials, and Western Europe, with its industrial power, it would have been a serious threat to the United States if it would have played this role, which it could have played, in the international system. So why don't we think about interest of states and the interests of the United States of keeping Europe, well, down and modest and so on? It reminds me of the beautiful definition Lord Ismay gave of NATO. Yeah? Keep the Americans in, the Russians out, the Germans down. And this may be the real background of the conflict we live actually, and not so much the bad Russians against the good Ukrainians.
I have for a long time, I misunderstood this war as thinking it is an accidental result of misaligning interests on all sides. But to me, it looked like so evident that Ukraine just has to be neutral, and then that will solve that will serve as the solution to problems between the international stakeholders and the local stakeholders, and that never happened. And I looked at that for a long time as an accidental result of bad policy. No. But by now, I do think it is the intentional policy that this solution could not emerge, and that's a fault of the West. And we know now. Angela Merkel said so. Hollande said so. The Minsk peace accords were never meant to solve the problem, which is extremely sad.
And not only the Minsk accords, long before, many years before, all the disarmament treaties, take for example the enormous treaty on conventional forces in Europe, which was signed and ratified by Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. No NATO member has signed or even ratified this treaty. And this was a treaty which, if you read it again, I think it's almost 140 pages. Weapon system after weapon system are written down. We can get rid of this. We take some, or we keep so many of this, and so on and so on. It was a very, very detailed system, which would have ended up in that what German peace researchers once developed as the concept of structural impossibility to attack. If we would have a military a structure of our military forces, which would signal to the neighbor, yes, we have defense forces, but with that army, we cannot invade you. This would be a tremendous contribution to peace, and even in the sense, I believe very much in neutrality, in the sense of, well, a state which cannot attack the other, he is on the way to neutrality.
Yes.
Necessary.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And as soon every war of aggression after the Second World War happened basically in the name of self-defense abroad. So that's the root of all evil.
Even Hitler didn't attack any people. He was always defending.
Yeah, he was always claiming he was defending, and that happens again and again. And fun fact, the Swiss were thinking about building an atomic bomb until the 1970s, and they gave it up when they realized that their defense doctrine was to never ever go abroad. You only use weapons inside the country if somebody comes in. And when they realized that using an atomic bomb inside Switzerland would, you end yourself too. That's when they understood this thing won't help us under our doctrine.
Yeah, perfectly right.
And
neutrality is very, very much linked to non-aggression,
and a realistic approach to pacifism.
Yeah.
Maybe I have one more big question on my mind, which is that in order to explain why this war in Ukraine and some of the other wars happen, one of the very common phrases is the military-industrial complex. And I think that's also part of critical peace studies, to focus on the role of money and how money then creates circles that kind of create violent structures and incentives to violence itself. Now, we know that capitalism does create that military-industrial think tank complex, especially in the United States. But at the same time, there's so many industries that depend on peace. So the whole trade industry, and basically the history of neutrality is the history of countries wanting to do trade while others are at war. So why is it that we have a military think tank industrial complex, but not a trade industrial peace complex? There should be another side, but that other side seems not to exist. Like all the money that should be there in order to foster peace.
That's a very, very good question. Let me say this. When you have an armament industry, which you can reinforce and reproduce and so on and so on, you are making money each time you sell a new car and so on and so on. Trade is a question of, is that needed? Once the market is satisfied, saturated, but the market has got what he needs, you just can start from the beginning. This is different with the armament industry. And if you say military industrial complex, I'm just working on a paper where I take up again the project for a new American century. They are all together. Take these signatories of this document. You have the personification of the military industrial complex, which is not an invention of the two of us, but which has been once defined by General Eisenhower in his speech when he
warned against it.
Yeah, and very much. And he saw one thing very rightly: it's the end of democracy. It is a new form of dictatorship. And what happened actually is the concept of the project of a new American century. We have to be military so strong that we control everything. Who knows whether the United States will survive this enormous program of armament? But it could be that they not only peacefully collapse, but that they make a big war with all the weaponry we have. It is a crazy time in which we are living, and it is basically crazy as well when peace researchers, when I come back to the beginning of this interview, say the production of arms and the delivery of arms is able to make peace. Now, it will make more destruction, more hatred, longer wars, and more people who die.
The people who watch this channel, they think like we do. They understand what we are saying. So we are basically preaching to the believers. The question is why
they understand my English.
Your English is wonderful. Don't worry. This works perfectly. No, the question is why is it that around 80% or so of people see the world in completely different way, in a way where peace through weapons makes sense, where that is an intuitive approach, whereas to us this intuitively disgusts us, this intuitively insults the mind.
Yeah, I think it's the power of the media, and I'm really amazed looking at the actual situation, especially in Germany, with what strength the totality of the newspapers and of the TV channels and so on are in one line for this war. It's unbelievable. There is, some elements of critique. You must find them. You must know where you find such a channel. It is unbelievable. It reminds me, just got the beautiful prize on the film of the book of Erich Maria Remarque and the film Nothing New in the West. These young people, children, who ran toward their own death, what for? What for? For freedom, for democracy, in the name of the Kaiser? Please.
We
How
are
does it
going
work?
through
I don't know.
some form of decentralized totalitarian mechanism that kind of creates this tickle down, like conformity, tickle down conformity. And at the moment, this kind of discussion on YouTube, etc., is still totally possible, luckily. But if it continues, this too will stop. The machine has to stop this too at some point. I hope we can turn it around before that.
Yeah, yeah.
Professor Ruf, I'm sorry to end on such a pessimistic note, but it has been wonderful talking to you, and I hope we remain in touch.
It was a pleasure, and yes, I hope so. We can work together a little bit in order to move people toward thinking. And I just have one more sentence from Egon Bahr, who shortly before he died, he had made a conference in a school in Heidelberg. And there he said, and please remember one thing: people or states do not act because of human reasons. State act for interests. Believe me that. No matter what your teacher of social sciences tells you in the school. And I think it's right when we start to see about interests, about rational interests, we understand better what happens, and especially we come down from this thing, bad people, we are the good people, we must educate them. No, this will not work.
This makes a lot of sense to me, and we will go that route. Thank you, Professor Ruf.
Okay, thank you.